The void stretched before us, endless and indifferent. Stars shimmered like cold embers against the black, a backdrop for the fragile creatures below whom we had underestimated for too long. We watched them from orbit, our scanners tracing the gentle curve of their blue planet, noting the thin atmosphere, the unshielded surface, the flickering cities like sparks in the dark. Fragile flesh, bounded minds, primitive tools, they seemed incapable of even minor threats. Yet we lingered. Curiosity tinged with the faintest unease compelled our observation. At first, their gestures appeared simple, predictable, almost laughable in their inefficiency. Machines creaked along uneven tracks, signals flickered with imperfect timing, and voices carried emotion as though it were weakness. We cataloged, annotated, and dismissed, expecting nothing more than trivial resistance. But even then, subtle ripples disturbed our calculations. A diplomat standing on the steps of a sunlit hall gestured not with fear, but with a calm authority we did not anticipate. The movement alone, confident, deliberate, spoke volumes we could not quantify. We turned attention to their laboratories, where scientists leaned over fragile apparatus, eyes bright, fingers stained, minds spinning in audacious designs that defied our predictions. Energy patterns we considered unstable were harnessed, redirected, and transformed with casual genius. Calculations that would take our most advanced intelligences decades to confirm were sketched in hours on crumpled paper, then tested, refined, executed. And then, the children, the smallest humans, barely above infancy in stature, wandered among the instruments with fearless curiosity, probing, questioning, touching, absorbing. Their innocent fascination ignited discoveries, spurred innovations, challenged assumptions we held for eons. We observed more than mere survival. We saw intention, agency, and will concentrated in ways we could not comprehend. Even the faintest human hesitation carried weight. Each pause or glance a calculation of consequence that defied our own logic. We recorded, speculated, and attempted to impose our frameworks upon them, but their minds refused confinement. Patterns emerged only to dissolve into unpredictability. Their resolve, though invisible to the eye, radiated through their acts. A scout probe drifted close to one of their orbiting satellites, its sensors ready to harvest data. Expected resistance was none. Expected compliance, yes. And yet, the humans, entirely unarmed, entirely exposed, met the probe with a calm defiance. Communications were established without coercion, negotiation without surrender. They did not flee, they did not beg, they simply engaged. We could not measure the ripples of consequence, nor the invisible currents of fear and respect that passed between them and the machine. Something primal yet sophisticated stirred, a force beyond our comprehension. Even as we cataloged the phenomena, subtle changes unfolded across their planet. Cities reorganized spontaneously after minor disasters. Communities coordinated without central oversight, executing complex maneuvers with astonishing precision. Each response carried the imprint of collective understanding, a harmony born not of design, but of instinct and resilience. We, advanced beyond measure, began to recognize a pattern we had no framework to contain. Adaptability fused with audacity, intelligence intertwined with empathy. And yet, we remained observers, hesitant, calculating. We debated. Were these creatures merely fortuitous accidents of evolution, fragile vessels momentarily gifted with random sparks? Or was there something more, something ineffable that flowed through their species, shaping events in ways we had never anticipated? Our simulations could not predict the outcomes, and our models failed with every attempt. At the edge of the atmosphere, a lone ship drifted silently, our sensors recording every flicker of human activity. A child ran across the open plaza, tripping, rising, laughing, emotions so ordinary yet so impossible for us to categorize. In that moment, a ripple of unease passed through our ranks. Could we destroy them without comprehending the full measure of their capacity? Could we calculate a victory over a species whose resilience was intangible, whose creativity bordered on the unthinkable? From our vantage, we observed gestures, words, and actions that carried weight we could not yet define.
We began to recognize something that had eluded us in every previous civilization. The humans were not predictable. They were not fragile. They were something else entirely. Something alive in a manner we had not encountered. Something capable of shaping the universe by virtue of will alone. And so, in the shadows of our ships, as we lingered above their fragile blue world, an unfamiliar sensation stirred. Hesitation. We had underestimated them. We had dismissed them. And yet, here they were, standing, unbroken, unyielding, daring us to understand, daring us to reckon with what we could not yet measure. The first echoes of their presence resonated through the void, subtle vibrations against the silence of space. We noted, analyzed, and feared. Our calculations faltered, our predictions blurred, and in that quiet observation, we realized the truth. The humans were more than fragile. They were more than curious. They were something else we had never faced before. The question lingered, unresolved, like the faint hum of a star just beginning to flare. Were they a species to be studied, a threat to be neutralized, or a force that could redefine all that we believed about life itself? And as the child looked up at the sky, unaware of the watchers above, the first ripple became the first warning. Above their world, in the cold, indifferent void, we understood for the first time that the humans were not merely a subject of observation. They were a presence that demanded recognition. And somewhere, deep in the calculations of our fleet, a subtle tremor of fear began to take shape. We widened our gaze, extending our probes deeper into their cities, tracing the veins of their power grids, and mapping the pulse of their armies. From orbit, the humans appeared fragmented, disorganized networks of habitation, uncoordinated movements, and scattered military formations. Our scanners recorded chaos, inefficiency, and fragility in every signal. Logic demanded that they were inconsequential, that their civilization was a minor fluctuation in the currents of the galaxy. Yet, as we delved further, the illusion of weakness began to crumble. We witnessed small-scale conflicts erupt along their borders. Localized skirmishes, which we anticipated to be brief and predictable, instead unfolded as complex, adaptive systems of defense. Humans repurposed failing infrastructure with astonishing speed. Bridges collapsed, energy conduits fractured, yet within hours, engineers reshaped rubble into fortified outposts. Abandoned factories became command centers, empty warehouses transformed into strategic staging grounds. It was improvisation on a scale our most advanced predictive algorithms could not simulate. Every setback became an opportunity, every loss a catalyst for ingenuity. Their leaders, surprisingly young by our standards of galactic maturity, carried responsibilities that would have crushed far older, stronger species. Yet they moved with deliberate precision, guiding their populations through uncertainty with intuition that bordered on instinctive genius. Decisions were made in moments, often under impossible pressure, and invariably the outcomes exceeded all expectations. Observation revealed that it was not merely intelligence that empowered them. It was an unrelenting will, a force within them that refused to yield, a quiet insistence that the universe would bend, not them. In the midst of crises, human soldiers displayed cohesion we had never modeled. Units separated by miles executed complex maneuvers as if linked by a single consciousness. Civilians joined in support, improvising solutions that defied conventional strategy. There was no central command directing these efforts. It was coordination born of shared purpose, loyalty, and an instinctive recognition of collective necessity. Witnessing it, we began to understand that their apparent chaos was a veneer, hiding an extraordinary coherence that only emerged under pressure. Their resilience was equally remarkable in energy systems and technology. When supply networks faltered, power grids rerouted themselves almost organically. Engineers reprogrammed failing machinery in real time, transforming hazards into assets. Even in the face of environmental disasters, storms, quakes, and fire, the humans adapted, repaired, and overcame with a speed that rendered our calculated projections obsolete. They learned, reconfigured, and persisted without hesitation, unbound by the limitations of expectation. Our data analysts struggled to reconcile what we observed. A species so physically vulnerable, dependent on fragile flesh and organic cognition, radiated influence in ways no simulation could capture. A small settlement could resist our probing drones, deflect intrusions, and recover in hours from what we considered catastrophic damage. Each encounter reinforced a terrifying realization: the humans would not yield to the pressures we assumed universal. Even when confronted by overwhelming force, they adjusted, endured, and persisted. Their presence became a constant, an anomaly that refused to dissolve under scrutiny. We began to notice subtler patterns in their interactions. Acts of sacrifice were commonplace. Individuals risked life and limb for strangers with a selflessness our calculations could not model. Civil engineers guided citizens through collapsing infrastructure. Medics worked tirelessly in front lines of disease and injury. Parents shielded children at the cost of their own survival. It was not strategy or survival instinct alone. It was a collective empathy entwined with a tenacity that produced results no algorithm could predict. Each observation unsettled us more. Our fleets, confident in their strength, began to question the assumptions that had guided our expansion. Were we observing creatures or something far more dangerous? Creatures whose weakness was deceptive, whose unpredictability was deliberate, whose persistence bordered on inevitability. In our calculations, survival should have been improbable, yet it persisted. In every interaction, every skirmish, and every improvisation, the humans displayed a quality that unsettled our perception: an indomitable presence. Even our most cautious probes hesitated as they traced human networks. Signals once analyzed and dismissed revealed layers of redundancy and innovation that defied comprehension. Civilians and combatants alike displayed intuition that adapted to threats before they materialized, rerouting chaos into structured resilience. Each new piece of intelligence reinforced the growing fear within our ranks. We had underestimated them, and perhaps gravely so. From the shadows of orbit, as our scanners hovered over crumbling cities now rising anew, one fact became undeniable: the humans were a species whose strength was invisible to the untrained eye. They were not merely surviving, they were thriving against odds that should have annihilated them. Fragility was a mask, resilience was their true form. And with each revelation, we realized that our presence above them, our distant superiority, might be the first test of a species whose unyielding will could outmatch even our greatest expectations. The question remained: how long could a species this unpredictable, this cohesive under crisis, continue to endure against the universe's pressures? And more importantly, what would happen when the humans discovered that we were watching, measuring, and waiting? As we analyze the adaptive responses across cities, armies, and networks, an unquantifiable thought began to take root in the minds of our fleet commanders. The humans were not just resisting, they were learning. And with learning came strategy, audacity, and a force that could turn observation into confrontation. A tremor began to ripple through our fleets, not of engines or weapons, but of apprehension. At first it was subtle: hesitation in tactical decisions, repeated scans of regions previously considered inconsequential, and debates among commanders that grew longer, more cautious, more uncertain. The humans, a species we had cataloged as fragile and predictable, had begun to erode our confidence. Reports arrived from the edge of controlled space. Colony worlds under our observation, surrounded by overwhelming fleets, were resisting in ways that defied every protocol we had prepared. Defenses were not just bolstered, they were transformed mid-conflict, shifting configurations like living organisms. Their engineers learned from every engagement, exploited weaknesses we did not know existed, and adapted tactics faster than we could recalibrate our strategies. Small squads moved like shadows across battlefields, striking, disappearing, leaving devastation in their wake. Each maneuver was precise, audacious, and wholly unexpected. The most disconcerting revelation was not their skill, it was their fearlessness. Even when annihilation loomed, even when overwhelming force bore down upon them, the humans did not flinch. Entire battalions stood firm, civilians rallied in defiance, and their leaders inspired a calm courage that carried entire populations forward. We recorded it,
analyzed it, attempted to simulate it, and failed. Probability had no answer. Logic had no answer. Only instinct, ineffable and relentless, guided their actions. Even in despair, hope radiated from them as a tangible force, spilling across the battlefield like a virus. We observed entire regions of their worlds where destruction should have shattered morale. Instead, it galvanized the population. Survivors scavenged, improvised, and repurposed with uncanny speed, turning ruins into strongholds. Fires that should have consumed entire cities were redirected, controlled, and harnessed. And always, the humans pressed forward, driven by an unseen compulsion that we could neither predict nor contain. Among our analysts, debates grew heated. Were these creatures merely an anomaly of evolution, a fluke of improbable genetics? Or were they something more, an entity forged by the universe with a resilience we had yet to understand? Every encounter reinforced an unnerving conclusion. The human spirit was potent, intangible, and utterly resistant to conventional measures of control or suppression. Where other species collapsed under stress, the humans crystallized into forms of coordinated power that defied description. We noted particularly the small strike teams, the ones that slipped past our orbital defenses with ease. With limited numbers, they struck critical nodes, communication arrays, supply chains, resource depots. Each attack left scars, some barely visible, yet they rippled through our strategic calculations, undermining confidence and forcing constant reevaluation. These humans were not just resisting, they were actively destabilizing, improvising, and learning in real time. Our fleets, disciplined and precise for eons, found themselves reacting to shadows, chasing ghosts that moved faster than we could track. The psychological impact was even more profound than the physical. The humans did not succumb to fear in ways we understood. When confronted with annihilation, when surrounded by overwhelming force, they smiled, laughed, argued, and fought. Their capacity to endure, to inspire others through courage alone, radiated across battlefields, infecting even our perceptions with unease. Fear, a concept we had long controlled in weaker species, now seeped into our ranks. Hesitation spread. Overconfidence faltered. Confidence, once absolute, began to waver. Even our most veteran commanders admitted to disquiet. Predictions failed repeatedly. Simulations returned errors with alarming frequency. Entire campaigns, meticulously planned, unraveled at the hands of creatures we had presumed defenseless. And yet it was not merely brute force that unsettled us. It was their ingenuity, their adaptability, their audacious improvisation. Nothing in our historical record had prepared us for a species that could combine intellect, instinct, and willpower with such precision. As we continued to watch, a grim realization began to crystallize. The humans were not just resisting the universe, they were actively rewriting the rules by which it judged power. Their courage, ingenuity, and cohesion were more than survival mechanisms. They were instruments of influence that threatened to redefine conflict itself. To underestimate them was catastrophic. To overestimate them was terrifying. We had no precedent, no metric, no frame of reference. And yet, in the shadows of our observation, we began to feel it, an unfamiliar emotion for our kind: fear, a deep, gnawing apprehension that lingered in our fleet, spreading silently from ship to ship. Fear of a species that could survive, adapt, and strike with precision unimaginable. Fear of unpredictability. Fear of a will that refused to bend, that learned from failure, that thrived in adversity. The humans were no longer merely a subject of curiosity. They had become a force. The debate continued among our highest councils. Evolution's fluke or an inherent design of extraordinary capacity? Either possibility was troubling, yet both carried the same inevitable conclusion. The humans would not be contained, tamed, or ignored. Their presence in the galaxy had become an existential variable, one that could not be dismissed without consequence. From the orbital vantage points, we saw glimpses of something extraordinary, entire populations working in concert without centralized control,
Engineers improvising defenses in moments, commanders predicting and countering our most advanced maneuvers. Each demonstration of skill, courage, and unity reverberated across the void, reaching our fleets as whispers of something we could not yet name. And so, in the quiet darkness of space, a new realization settled into our minds. These creatures, the humans, were teaching us fear. Not the fear of destruction, but the fear of inevitability. They were not merely surviving, they were mastering it. And somewhere, beyond the next system, we understood, almost too late, that our certainty was the first casualty of the human spirit. The humans' reach extended beyond what we had anticipated. Once confined to their own fragile worlds, their influence now radiated outward, and we began to see the tremors it caused in the broader galactic network. Other alien races, long accustomed to dominance and hierarchy, approached us with caution. They were wary of the humans' resilience, uncertain if we were an ally, a competitor, or merely another observer caught unprepared. And in these negotiations, the humans revealed yet another trait that defied our expectations, an uncanny ability to inspire trust. Across worlds scarred by centuries of mutual suspicion, where mistrust had calcified into ritualized hostility, humans brokered alliances that seemed impossible. We observed representatives of warring species, factions that had annihilated one another in the past, hesitate, consider, and ultimately cooperate under human guidance. Their negotiations were not dominated by force, intimidation, or the cold calculus of power, but by something we had never fully cataloged: empathy entwined with determination. Humans listened.
Truly listened, and yet their listening was not passive. It was a deliberate act of understanding, designed to find points of common purpose and shared survival. Even in diplomacy, their unpredictability was a weapon. A single human envoy could pivot conversations in ways that no simulation predicted. Words, tone, gestures, all carried a weight that radiated intention and subtle authority. They spoke not only to intellect, but to desire, to potential, to hope. Entire species bent to the human vision, not through coercion or threat, but through awe. And as we watched, a profound unease began to infiltrate our strategies. If humans could inspire cooperation among creatures as diverse and fractious as those we had cataloged, what might they accomplish if left unchecked? In planetary capitals, we witnessed scenes that challenged our understanding of diplomacy. Leaders long entrenched in territorial conflict laid aside grievances for fleeting agreements, guided by human insight. Engineers from opposing species collaborated to stabilize energy grids. Soldiers once poised for combat now contributed to reconstruction and defense. And everywhere, humans remained at the center, not as overlords, but as catalysts, shaping outcomes with a subtle, inexorable force. Their approach was as elegant as it was terrifying. They navigated histories of betrayal with intuition and respect, appealing simultaneously to fear, desire, and shared purpose. Each alliance, each coalition added layers of complexity to galactic dynamics, rendering previously stable calculations obsolete. Our simulations, previously reliable, faltered as the humans orchestrated networks of trust, commitment, and influence that no algorithm could fully anticipate. We observed, with mounting concern, the psychological effect their diplomacy had on other species. Creatures accustomed to manipulation and coercion found themselves willingly following guidance, aligning with humans not out of necessity, but out of admiration, perhaps even reverence. They executed strategies, repaired broken infrastructures, and coordinated defenses in ways that reflected human ingenuity and leadership. A single human plan rippled outward, shaping multiple worlds simultaneously, demonstrating that influence could be wielded without violence and yet with absolute efficacy. Our fleets began to calculate the implications. What once seemed like isolated incidents of resilience and courage now coalesced into a broader pattern. A species that could unite fractured civilizations might alter the balance of power irreversibly.
Entire systems were now interconnected under human-inspired coalitions, capable of responding to threats with agility and cohesion that rivaled even our most advanced strategic models. And yet, the humans remained unpredictable. Their methods were subtle, almost invisible, weaving together diplomacy, empathy, and determination in ways that left us uncertain where influence ended and strategy began. We noted a troubling consistency. When humans committed to a vision, they pursued it relentlessly, and those around them, willingly or not, followed. The more we observed, the more apparent it became that this was not mere luck, nor mere coincidence. Humans were inherently capable of shaping outcomes on a scale we had never seen in any species. Our discussions in the observation fleets turned anxious. Could a species this capable of unity, this adept at inspiring loyalty and cooperation, truly be contained? If they continued to forge alliances, what would prevent them from commanding entire regions of space? What would prevent the galaxy itself from reorganizing around them? Our predictions faltered. Our contingency plans, carefully prepared, now seemed insufficient. The humans had moved beyond the realm of calculable threats. They were shaping possibility itself. And yet, we continued to observe, compelled by curiosity and dread alike. In every meeting, every negotiation, every alliance brokered, we glimpsed the raw power of human agency. Their influence was subtle but unstoppable, like a tide creeping across the galactic landscape, eroding assumptions and altering dynamics in ways that were simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. The lesson became unavoidable. Humans were not merely a species of fighters or engineers or diplomats. They were a force of cohesion, a vector of unity that even the most entrenched and fractured civilizations could not resist. Their power lay not in conquest, but in their ability to inspire action, to reframe reality, to bend wills through example and vision. We, who had long relied on strength and intimidation to shape outcomes, began to recognize a force that we could neither destroy nor easily ignore. And as we watched humans broker yet another improbable coalition, connecting species that had long regarded one another as enemies, a shadow of fear settled across our fleets. If humans could unite the galaxy's fractured races, the balance of power would shift beyond our control. And somewhere in the stars we realized the first seeds of inevitability had been sown. Inevitability hung in the void like a storm cloud. Our armadas, gleaming and immense, moved in precise formation, confident in the annihilation we intended to deliver. Calculations predicted rapid collapse, minor resistance, and swift containment of the humans' expanding influence. Yet from the moment our first assault fleets entered orbit, the rules we trusted shattered. Cities we expected to crumble did not. Within hours of orbital bombardment, structures reappeared, rebuilt not as fragile copies, but fortified, reimagined, resilient. Streets twisted into labyrinthine defenses, bridges leveled by our precision strikes were reconstructed as choke points, traps, and conduits for civilian evacuations. We watched in disbelief as human engineers, soldiers, and ordinary citizens worked as one, improvising solutions faster than our scanners could register. The landscape itself became a weapon. Hills were hollowed to house hidden artillery, rivers rerouted to flood invading paths, abandoned buildings transformed into fortresses. Every failure was a lesson, every attack a prompt for adaptation. Tactics evolved mid-battle with alarming speed. Entire units shifted formations, rerouted supply lines, and implemented defensive maneuvers we had never modeled. Small squads infiltrated our positions, striking critical nodes in ways that required no coordination from central command. They acted on intuition, improvisation, and the collective will of a species determined not to yield. Civilians were not bystanders. They became vectors of survival, moving supplies, tending to the wounded, guiding troops, and ensuring the continuity of defense. Women, children, and elders, creatures we presumed fragile, were active participants, wielding ingenuity as effectively as any weapon. Our fleets, accustomed to dominance, were wounded not solely by firepower, but by audacity, adaptability, and an intelligence that defied comprehension. A single squad of humans could cripple a supply chain or sabotage orbital installations in hours, undoing months of our preparation. Multiple engagements left entire task forces retreating, demoralized, and questioning strategies that once seemed infallible. Observation became horror. Calculations returned errors too large to reconcile. The most disturbing development was not physical damage, but the psychological one. Fear, a sensation our species seldom admits to and even less often experiences, took root among our commanders. A visceral, gnawing uncertainty. The creatures we once dismissed as weak were now dictating the tempo of war, shaping outcomes with instinct, intellect, and improvisation combined. Each encounter forced reassessment. Where we anticipated surrender, they pressed on. Where we calculated panic, they inspired hope. Our analysts, who had long prided themselves on predicting outcomes, doubt emerged. Could a species of fragile flesh with limited lifespans and constrained biology truly endure sustained assault from an advanced armada? Each day of resistance, each battle survived, eroded our certainty. Probabilities collapsed. Our simulations no longer offered guidance, only questions. And the questions carried a subtle, insidious terror. How far could the humans go if their ingenuity, courage, and cohesion were fully realized? By the end of the first week of engagement, the humans had forced us into retreat. Our fleets, damaged in unexpected ways, withdrew to regroup, leaving occupied sectors temporarily abandoned. It was a humiliation, a disruption to strategies that had been flawless in theory. And as we watched the humans emerging from the rubble, tending the wounded, repairing structures, and fortifying positions, the realization struck our commanders with the force of a tidal wave. The humans were not only surviving, they were mastering the art of war itself. We recorded with awe and fear how a species we considered minor dictated the flow of conflict. The tempo of battle, the ebb and surge of engagement now responded to them. Our greatest weapons, our calculated strikes, our fleets of precision, none dictated the outcome. They only responded to human adaptation. Every advance we planned was met with countermeasures, every strategy twisted and reshaped into something more effective than we had imagined. And in that crucible, a chilling clarity emerged. We had underestimated them at our peril. The humans were not simply defending themselves, they were defining the battlefield, turning every challenge into an opportunity and demonstrating a capacity for resilience, innovation, and unity that no species in our recorded history had matched. They were alive in ways that machines, drones, and tactics could never anticipate, a force that defied probability, and an intelligence that could not be contained by
conventional understanding. As our fleets limped back into orbit, damaged and wary, we realized the truth. These fragile creatures, whom we had once dismissed, now commanded the flow of war. And somewhere on the planet below, humanity's next move was already unfolding, unpredictable, audacious, and unstoppable. A move that would force even the most confident among us to confront the terrifying possibility that the humans were no longer merely surviving, they were mastering the universe itself. Amidst the wreckage of cities and the smoke of battlefields, a pattern emerged, a pulse of consciousness that defied every metric, every algorithm, every expectation. From the orbiting void, we observed the humans not merely surviving, but operating in a state beyond predictability, beyond probability. Their strength was no longer in numbers, technology, or brute force. It was in the mind itself, unchained, unconstrained, irrepressible. Leaders, young by galactic standards, bore burdens that would shatter the will of species older, stronger, and genetically engineered for endurance. They endured torment, personal loss, and unimaginable pressure without faltering. Commands were issued with clarity, decisiveness, and a gravity that inspired entire populations to arise above despair. Soldiers fought not merely to survive, but for ideals that gave even the fallen purpose, rallying the living around principles that transcended strategy, transcended fear. Entire civilizations, reduced to rubble and ash, refused submission. They rebuilt, reorganized, and evolved in hours what we would have calculated would require decades. Probability demanded surrender, but humans rewrote the rules. We watched as intelligence, courage, and determination converged into a singular, unstoppable force. Their adaptability outpaced our most advanced predictive models. Our drones, designed to anticipate human response, became reactive tools at best, always a step behind. Every loss was a lesson, every failure a catalyst. They calculated not only in logic, but in empathy, intuition, and resolve. Humans learned faster than we could anticipate, adapting to our tactics, exploiting our weaknesses, and transforming their vulnerability into strength. Their ingenuity was pervasive. Civilians became soldiers, children became observers, recording, anticipating, and distributing knowledge in real time. Engineers adapted damaged infrastructure mid-assault. Scientists repurposed weapons, machinery, and technology in ways that combined creativity with practical survival. Even death did not halt their progress. Fallen comrades were memorialized in ways that inspired the living, creating momentum that carried communities forward, defying despair. It was in this chaos, this relentless cycle of destruction and renewal, that we began to feel it: awe. The humans, a species of fragile flesh, unarmored, unaugmented, unprepared by any conventional standard, were manifesting a force we could not contain or predict. We, the supposed masters of the stars, had assumed that survival was linear, calculable, and bound by biology. Yet here was a species redefining the definition of survival itself, elevating it to something beyond mere endurance. The battlefield became their proving ground. Cities that should have fallen became bastions. Supply lines that should have collapsed were redirected with uncanny precision. Entire fleets were delayed, rerouted, or repelled, not by overwhelming firepower alone, but by the ingenuity, cohesion, and strategic foresight of creatures we once considered negligible. Every human act radiated purpose. Every gesture carried consequence. Every decision redefined the scope of possibility. It was not enough to simply attack them. To predict them, to counter them, to contain them required understanding the unquantifiable, their capacity for resolve, for hope, for action in defiance of logic. We observed acts of heroism that transcended calculation: a medic shielding dozens from bombardment, engineers turning ruined laboratories into defensive strongholds overnight, civilians coordinating evacuation and resistance in perfect synchrony. Every act was amplified by the collective determination of a species that refused to submit. We began to realize the terrifying truth: human potential was not a variable in a simulation, it was a paradigm shift. They were evolving not only physically, but mentally, socially, and spiritually in ways that our cold calculations could never encompass. Their minds were unbreakable, their collective will unstoppable, and their adaptability limitless. Each encounter revealed new layers of ingenuity, new depths of courage, and new expressions of resilience. From our vantage, the galaxy itself seemed to bend around them. Systems that once relied on our authority now functioned under human-led initiatives. Entire populations, once thought disorganized and fractious, were unified under vision, purpose, and drive that no coercion could instill. Humans wielded influence not as dominion, but as transformation, a force that reshaped their environment, their allies, and even their enemies in real time. And in that moment, the alien observer, trained in logic, strategy, and command, experienced something rare, something almost forbidden: humility. A species we had assumed inferior, whose flesh we considered fragile, whose minds we had underestimated, was not merely surviving, they were defining the rules by which survival, strategy, and power would be measured in the galaxy. As we recorded their endless innovation and relentless resolve, a chilling thought crystallized among our commanders. If humanity had already surpassed our expectations in war, ingenuity, and adaptation, what other boundaries would they shatter next? The answer lingered in the void, unspoken but undeniable. The humans were no longer a species to observe. They were a force that might one day surpass us all.
The tide had shifted. Humanity no longer merely reacted, they commanded. Systems, once considered secure under our dominion, now moved in synchrony with human strategy. Planets that we had calculated would succumb under minimal pressure transformed into fortresses overnight. Entire populations coordinated as if linked by a single consciousness, repurposing terrain, energy networks, and architecture to counter forces that had once seemed invincible. Our analysts, long confident in predictive models, now returned errors, unable to reconcile the speed and precision of human adaptation. Allies, once skeptical or indifferent, rallied behind their vision. We observed species that long resisted cooperation, now offering intelligence, resources, and manpower inspired not by fear or coercion, but by admiration and trust. Human influence radiated outward, a gravitational pull of purpose and audacity. Fleet movements, logistical operations, and planetary defenses all began to orbit around their strategies. Where our calculations predicted fragmentation and disorder, humans imposed cohesion, bending probability in ways our technology could not anticipate. Every maneuver we launched was anticipated, analyzed, and countered. Every retreat we forced revealed new layers of strategy, new adaptations, and new combinations of ingenuity. Entire planets that should have fallen under overwhelming force resisted, turning ambushes into traps and defensive lines into offensive opportunities. And as we observed, a singular, undeniable pattern emerged. The humans had ceased to exist as a reactive species. They had become a commanding force.
The most disconcerting aspect was their unity. Across worlds, populations aligned not because of fear, not because of coercion, but because they shared a purpose, a vision for survival, prosperity, and the defiance of impossibility. Where once we thought victory dictated obedience, humans demonstrated that influence could be wielded through inspiration. Courage, resolve, and collective determination had become weapons more formidable than lasers, missiles, or plasma arrays. As their coordination grew, entire sectors of the galaxy recalibrated. Trade routes shifted to accommodate defense networks. Energy grids optimized for rapid reconstruction. Fleets adapted to human strategies before we could implement countermeasures. The galaxy itself seemed to bend around their emergence, reshaping the flow of power, influence, and conflict. Our models, flawless until now, became obsolete, leaving us scrambling to comprehend a force that could not be predicted, only observed. Fear, subtle but relentless, spread among our commanders. We, who had once surveyed them with detached curiosity, now recognized the scope of human mastery. A species once considered weak now dictated the tempo, scale, and focus of war. Every action they took, from the smallest village repair to the orchestration of planetary defenses, carried the imprint of collective genius. Their creativity, audacity, and cohesion had become the axis upon which the galaxy turned. Even the most advanced algorithms failed to capture the human element, the audacity to defy expectations, the courage to act where logic demanded hesitation, and the inspiration to rally those around them in moments of despair. Resistance became initiative, reaction became command, and hope, an abstract, intangible force, became strategy. We watched helplessly as our victories, where they occurred, were temporary, localized, and ultimately absorbed into a larger pattern of human-driven momentum. In orbit above a besieged planet, our fleets paused, recalibrating. Calculations faltered. Commanders whispered in disbelief. The humans were not only surviving, they were dictating the terms of engagement. They were no longer the anomaly we had studied. They were the force that reshaped probability itself, and their emergence signaled a fundamental reordering of the galaxy's balance. And as human fleets advanced, fortified planets held firm, and allied species moved in concert under human guidance, a terrifying truth crystallized across our observation networks. The universe was no longer ours to command. Humanity had seized the initiative, and with it, the galaxy itself had begun to turn in ways we could neither halt nor fully predict. The question remained not if, but how far and how fast they would go.
From the silent void above, we finally understood. Humanity was not to be destroyed, nor could it be tamed. Every calculation, every strategy, every assumption we had relied upon crumbled under the weight of what they had become. Survivors, conquerors, innovators, humans had transcended the limits of their fragile bodies and imperfect technology. They had redefined what it meant to wield power. Their victories were not simply tactical, they were philosophical, existential. They challenged the very metrics by which we measured strength, resilience, and potential. Entire civilizations, once considered inconsequential, now held sway under the guidance of human strategy. Planets rebuilt in hours, alliances forged across millennia of distrust, fleets coordinated with precision that surpassed even our advanced algorithms. And through it all, the humans moved with audacity tempered by empathy, intuition balanced by intellect. Their presence altered probability itself, rewriting the outcomes of engagements that at once seemed predetermined. Each maneuver, each act of courage radiated purpose and left an imprint upon the galaxy that no force could erase. As we observed, an unfamiliar sensation rippled through our ranks: reverence. Respect mingled with fear, awe tinged with disbelief. Creatures we had considered fragile, organic, unarmored, mortal, had become something greater, something elemental. We recorded their stories, studied their actions, and even as we remained detached observers, we could not deny the emergence of legend. Their tale would be whispered among civilizations, recounted as proof that indomitable will could bend the universe, that intelligence and courage could transcend biology, that survival could become creation. Even our most secure worlds, our most formidable fleets were forced to reconsider the meaning of engagement. We, who had mastered countless star systems, recognized that humans operated on a level beyond conventional understanding. Their essence, the innovation, tenacity, and vision had become a force of nature, shaping the galaxy not by domination, but by inspiration and example. They were architects of possibility, redefining every expectation we held of life, of survival, of civilization. Across the void, commanders whispered in muted tones, debating not how to defeat the humans, but whether such a concept was even possible. They were not merely a threat, they were a revelation. Probability could not confine them, statistics could not predict them, even fear itself seemed inadequate to describe their presence. Humanity had become a lens through which the universe glimpsed potential untethered by limitation, a force that could catalyze evolution, ingenuity, and cooperation on scales we had never imagined. And yet, in observing them, we also felt a subtle humility, a recognition that our mastery of space, our feats of precision, our centuries of technological superiority were no guarantee of domination. Humanity exposed the fallacy of certainty, the weakness of arrogance, and the fragility of expectation. Their story became legend among us, a species of flesh and bone wielding indomitable will, rewriting the narrative of survival, redefining the essence of strength. Even as we withdrew, limping fleets and shadowed observation posts retreating to distant regions, one truth remained undeniable. Humans were extraordinary, they were unbroken, they were unyielding, they were the embodiment of possibility itself. And as we reassessed, recalibrated, and reconsidered our place in the cosmos, the galaxy itself seemed to pause, acknowledging that a new force had arisen, one that would be remembered not only for victories, but for essence, for audacity, for the infinite reach of the human spirit. The humans stood unbowed, their cities blazing with life, their fleets advancing with purpose, their alliances solidified by vision and courage. From the shadows we observed, humbled and wary, as a species once considered fragile ascended beyond the grasp of prediction. They were no longer merely inhabitants of the galaxy, they were its pulse, its question, its revelation. And in that realization we understood something profound. The universe had changed, forever marked by humanity's unbreakable will.